Welcome back to Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Our guest is Damien Sojoyner. He is a professor at Scripps College, specializing in Africana Studies, which is what?
It's a study of the African diaspora.
Diaspora. So it's not the African continent, it's Africans living outside of the African continent.
Including the continent as well.
Oh, as well,
Yeah,
okay.
so both the roots and the routes going
Well stated,
back and
well
forth.
stated.
Right.
Now, when you were getting your PhD, you did something that I think is just so incredibly interesting. You served as a substitute teacher in a high school called Southeast County High School, and you observed a trend that it's hard to deny is just ugly.
Right.
Talk to us about it.
What I was looking at was the relationship between schools and prisons. And I should say that Southeast County is a pseudonym, because there is actually a Southeast County school, but I mean,
There you have it.
But that's not the name of the
Okay.
school. So
Thank
it's a
you.
pseudonym
Okay.
for the school. So the relationship between schools and prisons, and in particular, what I was trying to figure out was there's a body of literature called the school to prison pipeline.
Yes.
And what I was seeing was more that it was not necessarily a pipeline, so that students weren't being funneled out from schools into prison, but rather the school itself was functioning as a prison.
Oh my.
And what I mean by that is that the technologies of control that we commonly think of as in place in prison are already in place in public education. So the mapping of the school through fences and gates, things of that nature, the level of security and policing in terms of there was multiple, there were staff members who were assigned to be sort of security, but then you had sheriffs that were around the school as well. So all these things that we don't necessarily associate with schools per se were commonly found within the school, or to say what we don't think of as education, or shouldn't think of as education.
And what's interesting is in the wake of the Newtown shootings, for example, there seems to be at some level a move to further securitize public school campuses.
Right.
What's your sense?
I think we should have a moment of pause and really just look at the history of it. And what I mean by that is that all the research indicates, for example, the DARE program, the Dare to Keep Drugs Out of Schools program, which put a lot of police in schools. What was found is that actually the drug usage rate went up after that program was put in place.
Why?
A lot of it is because when you put an authority figure within a classroom, for example, you're going to have resistance.
Right.
Because that's what
kids do.
Exactly, if you're told not to do something, in the manner of what they told not to do something, as opposed to having an actual conversation and engagement about what's going on besides the aspect of drugs. Why are kids utilizing drugs in the first place?
But you also look specifically at the young black male.
Right.
And how the young black male was being educated, how authority figures, teachers, administration, how they were interacting with this young black male high school student.
Right.
What did you find?
In particular, what I found was that a lot of emphasis was placed on the realm of sports, football and basketball for particular reasons. And the type of construction of masculinity was very dangerous in this way, that it was very like a man goes to war. It was all these militaristic and violent type of
metaphors.
Exactly, of what a man was, which only works in a very particular set of circumstances on the playing field or on the basketball court. Once you leave this and under that control, and under those very limited set of sort of things that happen, then you have problems. If you display that same type of aggressive behavior outside of that realm, you're criminalized as being deviant, violent, so on and so forth. And so you see that happening and you wonder, well, where are these things coming from?
Where?
So for example, what happened in Steubenville, Ohio.
Right.
So it
Remind us.
So in Steubenville,
The
Ohio,
gang rape.
Exactly, and there was 2 young men who were found guilty recently. Well, the football coach knew about the whole thing that was going on, and he was trying to brush it away. And so this sports has a lot to do. Athletics has a lot to do.
Boys will be boys. But I focus specifically on the young black male, because we look at statistics and the numbers they break your heart when you think about graduation rates for young black males. They're dropping.
Right.
They're not increasing.
Exactly.
What did you learn? In addition to these kind of sports metaphors, what else was happening?
There's a complete disregard for the intelligence of black males on one hand, in terms of the thinking is already that they're not smart, not intelligent. And so when you have that thought process, that's going to carry on. So by the time I got to high school, this was already baggage that came with them from middle school.
What about black females? How are they treated?
So there wasn't that much of a distinction necessarily. It was just that black males were doing worse than black females, but black females weren't doing that much better.
But were they treated differently vis-a-vis their non-black counterparts? I mean, I know we've talked about this on this program, the whole notion that, girls aren't good in science and math, and so, of course I don't believe that, but that's this kind of metaphor. Were you saying that kind of compounded with the black female?
I think there's a difference that's at play, and that difference is, of course, the social construction of gender and how that played out. So they weren't taught in the same ways to be necessarily violent, so on and so forth, but there was a lot at play in terms of how they were treated as young women on one hand, but a lot of the black women that were there were extremely poor and impoverished. And when you have that combination, it's a lack of access and power to sort of make waves or make changes. And also you're very vulnerable at the same time. And so what I mean by that is that the ways in which if black women were to act out in particular ways, they were treated as loud, obnoxious, so on and so forth. When really
the stereotype.
Exactly.
I want to ask you about a truancy program that has been adopted in Los Angeles County. I actually spoke with one of your students about it maybe a year ago or so. I think her name was Christy Hernandez.
That's right.
And it became, to my eyes, a bit disturbing how this truancy program, as well-intentioned as it may have been, was being implemented. Why don't you talk to us about that truancy program?
So the truancy program starts in the 1990s, actually right around the same time as the DARE program. And it comes out of the omnibus, of all things, drug act, because it was a provision that was put in place that allowed the state to prosecute parents if in fact their children were not in school. I think maybe in some regard it was well-intentioned, but the finding out years later, what we can see is that it was aimed completely at black and Latino students. And what I mean by that is that of all the tickets that have been culled thus far, something like over 85% have been issued out to black and Latino
part
youth.
of that is because of the way those students and their communities have developed around their local schools. There are transportation challenges. There are, as I understand it from Christy Hernandez, transportation really became the reason why many of these tickets were being issued.
Yeah, for being late on a bus.
Yeah, family units.
Right.
Explain that, because that becomes even more daunting.
Right. So there is those issues of getting to school on time, of people working late night shifts, multiple shifts at work, and not being able to drop their kids off, or maybe running late because they were caught up at work, things of that nature. But I think what's important and what we have to look at is the reason or rationale. Why was this program put in place during the time it was put in place?
Is the program still working? Is it still in place from now?
So the city council had made an amendment to change the harshness of it. It's still in place. But prior, on the third offense, it was up to $900 and more for a ticket. That has changed, but the program nonetheless is.
So what's the answer? I mean, what's the solution? In 1 minute or less, I mean, what can we do to kind of get our handle around this problem and try to effectuate positive change?
So I think there's three things. The first thing is that we have to undo the heavy reliance upon testing, standardized testing, because that has completely siphoned away money from other programs that will keep
That could be a whole other conversation.
That's a whole other conversation, right? But we have to look at why kids are not going to school in the first place. A lot of it because there's no buy-in to the school apparatus, and programs are being cut left and right. There's lots of money in education, but where that money is going. The second thing is you have to remove police from schools, because
that's controversial.
It is, but schools have gotten worse as more police have come in.
And third?
And the third thing is